Hi, welcome to part 2 of my video on recording business transactions. As promised in my previous video, I will be discussing the preparation of journal entries of a service concerned business. Let me stress again that to be successful in this topic of recording, it is necessary for you to memorize the normal balance or increased side of each account. Otherwise, you will just be making guesses as to whether you should debit or credit a certain account. So, if you haven't memorized that yet, please watch part 1 of this video about recording business transactions, where I gave tips on how to easily remember or recall the normal balance of an account. On the other hand, if you are already very familiar with the normal balance, then just continue watching this part 2 video. But before we begin the problem for journalizing, let me test you first about, of course, the normal balances. What is the normal balance or increased side of an asset account? Debit. That's correct. What is the normal balance of a liability account? Credit. How about capital? What's the increased side of capital? Credit also. Very good. What's the normal balance of drawing? Debit. Revenue or income? Credit. And how about expense? Debit is the normal balance of an expense account. In other words, if you want to increase an expense account, you have to debit it. If you need to decrease an expense account, you have to do the opposite. What's the opposite of debit? Credit. With that, let's have this problem. Journalize the following transactions of Marty Medical Clinic. Use these account titles: cash, accounts receivable, medical supplies, equipment, furniture and fixtures, accounts payable, notes payable, Marty drawing, Marty capital, medical fee revenue, surgical fee revenue, rent expense, salaries expense, medical supplies expense, and utilities expense. Here, we are given the specific account titles or account names to use in journalizing. So, when making journal entries, we have to choose the most appropriate account name to use from the list given here. We cannot create or invent our own account titles. By the way, the list of account titles used by a business in recording transactions is known as the chart of accounts. A term to remember, chart of accounts. Notice here the asset accounts of cash, accounts receivable, medical supplies, equipment, furniture, and fixtures. What are assets again? Anything of value which you own. So anything that is of value which you own is an asset. Okay? So these are the asset accounts from cash up to furniture and fixtures. Then we have accounts payable and notes payable. From the term payable, meaning you need to pay in the future. So we know these are liability accounts. Then we also have the withdrawal account. Marty drawing. Marty here is the surname of the owner. Also given here is the owner's equity account, Marty capital. We also have the revenue accounts, namely medical fee revenue and surgical fee revenue. And lastly, we have the expense accounts, rent expense, salaries expense, medical supplies expense, and utilities expense. Once again, always remember to use these account names exactly as given. Let's have the first transaction. On July 1, Dr. Marty invested 500,000 pesos and medical equipment worth 820,000 pesos in the clinic. So let's write the date, July 1. Now remember, when recording transactions, we are always on the point of view of the business, not of the owner. The owner is separate and distinct from the business, according to the concept known as business entity or accounting entity. So put yourself in the shoes of the business, not of the owner. Then ask yourself, what did I, as the business, receive? What did I, as the business, give up? Okay? In this July 1 transaction, Dr. Marty, the owner, invested or placed 500,000 pesos in the business. From the point of view of the business, what did it receive? Cash of 500,000. When it received the cash, what happened to the cash of the clinic? It increased, of course. The next question is, how are you going to record the increase in cash? Should you debit the cash or should you credit it? Debit, of course. Why? Because cash is an asset and the normal balance or increased side of an asset is debit. Therefore, to increase the asset cash, we have to debit it. Got that? So, under the description column, let's write cash. And 500,000 under the debit money column. Aside from the cash, what else did the owner invest in the clinic? It says here, medical equipment worth 820,000 pesos. From the point of view of the clinic, it received the medical equipment. So the asset medical equipment increased. How are we supposed to record the increase in medical equipment? We have to debit it because again, the increased side or normal balance of an asset like medical equipment is debit. But wait a minute, should we write here medical equipment? No, why not? There is no medical equipment given in the list of account names to be used, right? So what's the most appropriate account title to use? Just equipment. So debit equipment, not medical equipment. For 820,000 pesos. Notice, no peso sign should be placed in journal entries. Okay? No peso sign in journal entries as well as in posting to the ledger. Okay? Now, please keep in mind that every journal entry must have at least one debited account and at least one credited account. You cannot have a journal entry wherein all the accounts are debited with no credited account and vice versa. Okay? Every journal entry must have at least one debited account and at least one credited account. And the total debit must always equal the total credit. So far, we only have debited accounts, right? That means we are not done yet with our first journal entry. So what should be the credit? These assets, cash, and equipment came from who? From the owner. So the owner's equity will increase. What's another term for owner's equity? Capital. Okay, so how do we increase capital? Credit. So credit Marty capital for 1,320,000 pesos. Total debit so far, how much? 1,320,000. Total credit, the same amount. So total debit must always equal the total credit. To emphasize credit, in some countries like the Philippines, the credited account is indented, meaning written further to the right, not aligned with the debited accounts of cash and equipment here. Okay? But in other countries, they do not indent the credited accounts. Just the same, the account is understood to be credited, even though it is not indented, because the amount of the credited account is written under the credit money column. After that, we may write a short description of the purpose of the journal entry to record investment by owner. Just describe the transaction which you have recorded. Investment by owner. How about the PR column here? Should we place anything here? Not yet. Why? What does PR stand for? Posting reference. We only fill up this PR column when we go to the second phase of the accounting process, the posting or classifying. Since we are still in the first phase, which is journalizing, and we are not yet in the posting procedure, then we don't fill up the PR column yet here on our journal. Okay? Let's have another transaction. July 3. Bought medical supplies worth 50,000 pesos for cash. Again, think from the point of view of the business. When it purchased medical supplies, what happened to its medical supplies? Increased, of course. How are we going to record the increase in medical supplies being an asset? Debit. Because again, the normal balance of asset is debit. In exchange for the medical supplies received, what did the clinic give up? Cash. Here, cash. The transaction clearly says. When cash is given up, it decreases, right? So, how are we going to record the decrease in the cash? Cash is an asset. The normal balance of an asset is debit. Meaning, to increase the asset, you have to debit it. Right? But here, we should decrease the asset cash. So, what are we going to do? We have to credit it. So, credit cash for 50,000 pesos. Then, we add an explanation to record purchase of medical supplies. I hope by this time you have already realized that journalizing is not that difficult. We just have to ask ourselves, what did the business receive? What did it give up? Or what increased? What decreased from the point of view of the business? Then, we apply our knowledge about normal balance in order to properly record the increase and decrease. Let's proceed to the next transaction, July 4. Purchase tables, chairs, and cabinet on account, costing 60,000 pesos from furniture expert. When you make this purchase, you increase your tables, chairs, and cabinet, right? But how are we going to record the increase? Debit, because these items are assets, and assets have a normal balance of debit. But what is the most appropriate account name to use for tables, chairs, and cabinet from the given list in a previous slide? Furniture and fixtures. So, debit, furniture, and fixtures for 60,000 pesos. In exchange for the furniture, did the business pay cash? No. So, cash did not decrease. So, you cannot credit cash here. When you buy something without paying cash, your liability increases. Right? So, how do we increase a liability? Normal balance, credit. But what kind of liability should we credit? It says here, on account. So, accounts payable should be credited. Then, explanation. To record purchase of furniture on account. We cannot use the other liability account given in the list of account names, the notes payable. We cannot use the notes payable because notes payable is only used when a company issues a written promise to pay, known as promissory note. Is there any mention about a note being issued by the company here? There is none. So we only credit accounts payable, not notes payable.